Hi, this series is how to be a better field target shooter in 15 minutes. And we're talking to different field target shooters across the country and taking different field target topics in about 15 minutes or so and taking each one and giving you some information, some tips, some techniques on how to be a better field target shooter. Today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to be talking to Tyler Patner and about traveling with an air gun and specifically air travel. And so if you're going to go to many matches and Grand Prix and have to travel, which is a great thing to do, there's some things to avoid, some things to do whenever you're traveling on a plane with your air rifle. This is a little different because it's not the kneeling position. It's not the standing position. It's not about practice. It's more about being prepared and getting your rifle to the event in one piece and being prepared for whenever you travel with your air rifle. I'm going to talk to Tyler Patner about that. He's from Ohio, and he shoots WFTF, piston, and PCP. And he's been shooting since 2013. And he's been to Worlds. He's been to many nationals. He's traveled extensively with his air rifle, and he has a lot of experience with that. So let's talk to Tyler now about traveling with your air rifle. Hello again, Tyler. How are you doing?
Good, Philip. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for the time. I'd like to talk to you now about air travel with an air gun. Now, if you shoot local matches, you're not going to need to travel on a plane. But if you're going to Grand Prix, and especially if you're going to nationals, at some point you're going to need to get on a plane. And it's actually a good idea to go to Grand Prix that you have to travel to, because you're experiencing a whole different thing, a whole different environment, weather, people, setting, everything is great. And I've traveled a few times with my air gun, but I wanted to talk to you about traveling with an air gun. So right off the bat, let's just start with this. Do I have to buy a Pelican case to travel with an air gun? Can I get by with, my cheap case? What do you think?
So, both the TSA regulations here in the US and also your gun will thank you and take more pity upon you if you spend a little bit more on the case. With that said, you don't have to buy the most expensive Pelican or some of those other brands that are out there, but you should buy something, number one, that is lockable, and number two, that cannot be pried up at the end. So, if you go and buy a $30 or $50 Plano case or Flambeau case, those aren't going to quite do it. They are certainly lockable, but anybody with a screwdriver could get into one of those cases and just slide your gun out. Right. So you definitely don't want to go that route. Now, some of the $120 to $150 Planos you see, like anything with that pluck and pull foam, that's going to be kind of the baseline, right? And there are a bunch of companies out there. I have a case from a company called Eylar, EYLAR. That wasn't too expensive. I think it's a pretty good equivalent to my Pelican that I normally use. And it was only like $180. I think I got it on like a sale at some point, but I would take that thing anywhere in the world and not be worried about it.
Okay. So we definitely need a decent case, a good case.
Yep.
You've spent a lot of money on this air gun, so, you want to protect it, and it needs to be lockable. How many locks do I need to put on my case?
That's a good question too. This will vary depending on what airport you go to, or at least that's been my experience. I usually do two. So if there are 4 locking positions, I do 2. I've done all 4. I've only done 1. You can kind of do whatever you want as long as it is locked. That's the big part. I would do at least 1 on each side. That's kind of my bare minimum baseline. And I don't use the same brand of lock on both. So this sounds like kind of crazy. There's a big thing. If you go and read the TSA regs, they recommend TSA locks, of course. Don't do the TSA locks because there's a universal master key for that. Right. So that's not ideal. And I'm not saying there's not the same thing for some of those like Master Lock or other lock brand products that are out there, but they're beefier, and the TSA locks are these little flimsy things. You want to get something more sturdy and solid. At the end of the day, any of these could be defeated if somebody tries hard enough, but you want to make it kind of like they look at it and go, yeah, I'm not going to mess with that.
Yeah. So you put two different types of locks too, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I say if I have a rifle with a wood stock,
Mhm.
should I take the stock off and have it in the case with the stock off, or just have it together, or what do you think?
That is a great question. So I've done it both ways myself,
Mm-hmm.
taken it off and kept it on. Some of those shorter cases that get you around the oversized baggage limit, I think it's like 63 square inches or something like that, or cubed inches, I believe. Um, some of those shorter cases, you have to take the action and the stock
Yeah.
and separate them
Mm-hmm.
to fit them. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because sometimes your stock will flex, or the longer it is, if it slips under or over the foam. We had that happen once to my good buddy Jeff Paddock. We were flying to Baton Rouge for occasions. I think it was like 2016, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And his stock in his Pelican shifted under one of the layers of foam. And of course, like baggage handlers are not like, oh, they don't go, oh, a gun case. Okay, let me just baby that over, right?
Nope.
They toss it over just like they do everything else. So they must have tossed it over, and he got a nice hairline crack right at the grip of his Air Arms EV2. And thankfully, Bill Rabbit was there, and we actually went to like a Home Depot or something that the morning before the kind of sight-in day, and we're able to fix his stock in a hotel room. But that you're not going to be traveling with an engineer. I travel with engineers. You probably won't be. So, but that's a whole other story. You don't want to be in that position in the first place, right? So
Right.
definitely not a bad idea to separate those pieces, even if it is in a longer stock. Yeah.
Right, right. I've done both. At first I was just keeping the stock and all together, and then I started hearing some horror stories of people with cracked stocks, and so it kind of freaked me out a little bit. So I started separating. Very good. So we're supposed to degas the gun,
Yep.
and should we be concerned? If we degas the gun and we put it in the case and we get to our location, should we be concerned with air leaks once we gas the gun back up? Because this gun, if it's empty and you got all those O-rings in there and it's been thrown around, who knows, by
Yeah.
some gorilla some He-Man at the TSA, should I be concerned that this gun is going to leak whenever I get to my destination and gas it up?
So I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about it from the getting jostled around perspective, right? But I would definitely be concerned about it from there's two things. Number one, you've had this gun probably pressurized always, right? If it's a PCP, of course. Depressurizing the gun completely relieves all of the stress that was on those seals. And it is possible that if there was like a micro nick or something was starting to wear a little bit, that it kind of shrinks down or doesn't quite seal the same when you air it back up. That's always a concern. The other piece of that is that when you fly, you're going really, really high. And it gets really, really cold where they keep your gun. So it's possible that most of these O-rings are very durable rubber, Delrin material for like your valve poppets and things like that. Probably not a huge concern, but it's also possible that kind of extreme low temperature could play an impact or a role there as well. Okay. Full disclosure, if your gun doesn't have a gauge on it, like my Thomas doesn't have a gauge on it, I know how to degas it. I run it down pretty low, but I don't run it to empty. Right. I have made the mistake of flying with a gun full before, and nobody that checked it at the airport caught it. And it was fine, like didn't blow a seal or any of that. But I like to keep a couple hundred PSI in the gun if I can, right? If I can get around it. Just because it kind of makes me feel a little bit better when I get somewhere and then air it up, no issues.
Right. I'll tell you what's happened to me the last 3 or 4 times now. The last few times I've been flying. Now my rifle has a bottle on it, so whenever the TSA people look at it, it's very obvious that this thing has a big bottle on it, and so every time they want me to remove that bottle, because they want to look down in it to make sure it doesn't have drugs in it. Now, this particular rifle, you can actually take the bottle off and you can look down in it. The valve is not in the bottle. So what I've been doing is actually, I'll just go ahead and take the bottle off and have it separate in the case. And this last time, they even wanted me to turn the bottle around where it wasn't even pointing, like it couldn't be screwed on. You know,
Oh,
every airport you go to, you're going to run into somebody different. And
yep.
so anyway, just I guess
It is a good point.
yeah, I would say that
Yeah.
these people are not air gun experts, so they don't exactly know what they're looking at anyway. So just be as friendly as you can, as understanding as you can, and just
Yeah.
kind of roll with the punches. Yeah.
And you absolutely have to be prepared to show them the inside of the air cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody either knows it's an air gun, or like you said, Philip, you have a bottle, it's kind of obvious what it is.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared for that possibility or eventuality. The funny part of that, I guess, and even if you don't degas it, you have to have the ability to do it right then and there, so they can see it. Right, they want to see
Mm-hmm.
inside of the gun. But the funny part of that to me is like they put your gun through an X-ray machine.
Yeah.
The X-ray machine can see inside the bottle. It's not like
Exactly.
it's lead lined. Like, I mean, I guess they don't know that, but it's like you would think they'd run it through the X-ray first. Although some airports they have to send it kind of behind the scenes, and then you're not going to wait for it, right? They send you through, and if
Right.
your gun gets stopped for some reason, like yeah, it could be a whole nightmare. I've had some nightmare stories. I've witnessed some things like that before.
Yep.
Folks getting pulled aside because they left pellets in their case in certain countries and all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, and that's the next thing is like where do we put our pellets? We don't put it with the rifle.
So you can actually.
Oh, you can.
There is
Okay.
a
Excuse me.
there is a provision in the TSA regulations that allows you to travel with ammo, but it has to be in a separate container. Obviously, can't be like preloaded into magazines or anything like that. There's like some goofy restrictions on it, and they always ask you if you have ammo with you. I always say no because what they're asking for are not projectiles. They are asking for powder and primer,
Right.
right? They're
Okay.
worried about explosives, and I don't have any of those things.
Okay.
So I feel like I can say no in good conscience. But that's always been, I know some people like yeah, in the UK, if you do that, when they scan it, they can't see through the tin of pellets because it's lead, right? So they will pull you out of wherever you are, bring you back and be like, hey, you can't travel with these. So the couple of times I've gone to the UK, I just leave my pellets in the hotel room or give them to a shooter after the shoot's over because I know I'm not getting those back through, but coming over there, no problem.
Not a problem.
So
Okay.
it's always it's a little goofy. You kind of have to know these things, I guess, or talk to locals,
Mm-hmm.
about travel restrictions and things like that ahead of time.
Okay. Next question. I know if I ask three different air gun guys that travel on a plane, if I ask them three different people, I'll get three different answers. What do I call it? Do I call it a firearm? Do I
Uh,
call it an air rifle? What do I call this thing whenever I come up
yeah.
to the desk?
So in the U.S., if you're traveling domestically or on the U.S. side of an international flight, it's a gun. Use the most generic terms you
It's
can,
gun. Mm-hmm.
right? Rifle, gun, whatever. Because ultimately, the folks behind the counter don't care what it is, right? There's a procedure for weapons. They know that procedure, and that's what they're there to do and deal with. And they're fine with it. Like the first time I flew, I was so nervous, right? I felt like I was walking through the airport with a bomb, right?
Exactly.
And I got up to the counter and I was like, I'm flying with a gun. And the person was like, okay, cool. Can you open the case for me? Yeah, no problem. They took one look at it. They're like, whoa, I had a big scope on it and all that.
Mhm.
And they're looking at it going, that is fancy. What kind of gun is that? I was like, oh, it's an air rifle. And they were like, air rifle? Like, do you fill it with something? And I was like, uh and the person goes, oh, it's probably one of those spring guns. Now it was a PCP, but I saw my opening and I took it. And I was like, yeah, it's one of those. I'm taking it to a friend. I don't know that much about it. But now when I travel, I just use the generic terms because you just get yourself into kind of hot water if you throw out differences or things like that
Right.
into the mix. Just stay as kind of generic as possible.
Right. It's a gun. Okay, that's good. Do you think it's a good idea to throw in a tracking device in your case, like a Apple tag?
This is hilarious. Yeah, yeah. Maybe not I don't know what the functionality of some of these things are because I know There are some of them where they only last for so long from a power standpoint, and they can't transmit through certain types of materials and things like that. So I would do the research on it. Hindsight being 2020, I would absolutely do that now. I had never done that before, and I actually had a gun. I lost a gun 2018, I think, going to Poland. I showed up in Poland and the gun did not came. Yeah, and it. So I flew from Cleveland to Chicago. The gun made it to Chicago, but never left Chicago. Or if it did, it never got scanned onto a plane going to Poland or anywhere else that I know of. So it was gone. And that was very depressing.
Yes.
Still did okay at that Worlds, but yeah, that was a big downer. I definitely consoled myself with lots of beer when I got overseas. But yeah, no, that was not the greatest experience. I've not heard too many horror stories like that before. I think I was one of the first or only people I know to like have something go completely missing. But it does happen. So having a tracking device can certainly help you, but know that it's only going to help you to a certain point, right? I don't know what the capabilities are of these things now, but if they have batteries that last more than a week, that would be amazing.
Yeah. The only thing that's happened similar to that to me, and it worked out fine. It was this last year I was coming back from Baton Rouge, and I got home and my gun didn't. And I was actually having to fly to Los Angeles the next day, so I couldn't sit around and wait for somebody to bring me my gun. So, but anyway, it showed up the next day, and it all worked out. But it's a little unnerving whenever you get to your destination and your big fancy rifle didn't get there with you.
Yes, I've had that happen also. I was coming back from Worlds in 2019. I came back through Washington Dulles, and I don't know what I was doing. Like I went through their customs area and just like breezed on through. Never even thought, like, I didn't see my gun there. And their area is kind of weird. It's not like there are all these like, conveyor belts coming off of all the different flights. It's like just a couple different feeds, and I walked through, didn't see my case. I kind of went like, all right. And I just kept on going. Right. And I got a call and they were like, hey, we have your gun here. And I was like, I was supposed to wait. Okay, cool. Great. Awesome. So I ran. Right. And like my flight was the last out of the day. I ran, got it, got everything checked out. It was all good. Ran back. I was a sweating mess, barely made my flight. And I knew the gun wasn't going to make it onto the plane, but the airline knew also. And, so I got there and they said, oh, give us your address and we'll deliver it to you in the morning. And sure enough, on that first flight out, it came with it. And they had it to me, I think by, I don't know, like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's a stressful time.
A little unnerving. Yes, as you said, unnerving. Yes.
Yeah. So we got about 2 minutes left, and any last words of advice or thoughts on traveling with an air rifle?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one would be to definitely take the time to do a nice job cutting out the foam. Not that you can't do it with a knife, and I'm not talking about how it looks, but make sure everything fits nicely. And then when you pack everything up, that it's nice and tight, right? Yeah, exactly. Don't be worried about breaking anything because it's all foam on the inside. Make sure that you account for everything that you need, whether it's Allen keys, if you have to take your wheel off of your scope, like all of those things, extra seals, they should all be in the case with the rifle. I mean, O-rings you could take with you, I suppose, but tools and stuff like that, you should definitely have in the case. Also, if you have room to pack a soft case wherever you're going so that you have some way to, haul your gun around that's not in this big honking hard case, that's a good thing also. Yeah. The other thing I would look into is if you're going to be traveling a lot, I did this very early on, is get some kind of insurance policy or policy that covers your air rifles and your optics. Again, it depends on how much you spend on them. But many of the guys that Philip, you and I know, it's multi-$1,000 rifles and scopes and it gets up there real quick. So, if you've invested a lot of money and more importantly, your time into a rig like that, make sure you're insuring it. I have a personal articles policy through my insurance agent and they allow me to basically put anything I want on there. So, that came in handy that one time when I lost a gun, and I'll never travel with a gun that doesn't have it or isn't insured. So those would be my tips.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, thanks for the time and all the advice and wisdom, and I appreciate all that. And thanks for sharing with everybody.